"She smells like the woods after rain," the little girl whispered, arms wrapped around the woman the whole town had learned to fear. No one moved, no one spoke, because in that moment they realized the woman they had shunned for years was dying, and the smell they avoided wasn't filth, it was death, quiet, lingering, and forgotten. If you believe some stories deserve to be heard, especially the quiet ones, hit subscribe and join us for the rest of this unforgettable tale. Maple Hill never made the news. It wasn't the kind of town that hosted festivals or tragedies, nor did it produce senators or serial killers. It simply existed, tucked away between the folds of two pine-covered hills in northern Oregon where fog lingered long after sunrise, and the streets smelled faintly of cedar and chimney smoke. People here lived slow, deliberate lives. They knew each other's dogs' names, birthdays, and bad habits, and they all knew about Mary Whitmore. She lived at the very end of Cedar Street, in a one-story cabin that looked like it had grown out of the ground. Shutters painted the color of old honey, window boxes with wilted lavender. Her porch creaked even in silence, and the rocking chair beside her front door hadn't moved in weeks, until today. Everyone had their own version of who she was. Some said she used to be a nurse in Portland. Others thought she was a widow who'd never recovered. There were whispers, quiet, persistent, about why she lived alone, why no one ever visited, why even the mailman preferred to drop letters from a distance. But no one ever asked her directly. They didn't have to. The answer, as far as most were concerned, floated right around her wherever she went. It was a smell, not the kind that passed with the breeze or faded with soap. It clung to the air, thick and unrelenting. Some days it was like sour milk left too long on the stove. Other times it hinted at something earthy, decaying, wet, like fallen leaves soaked in a clogged gutter. People crossed the street when they saw her coming. Children giggled and pointed from behind fences. The brave ones called her the Witch of Cedar Street. The rest just avoided her. Mary never reacted. She walked to the market on Thursdays, bought her bread and canned beans, then returned home, her shoulders square and her gaze fixed just above the heads of others. She never raised her voice, never complained, never explained, and the town, in return, never asked. Until the day a little girl ran into her arms and hugged her like she had been waiting all her life to do so. It happened just before noon at the farmers' market that gathered in the church parking lot every Saturday. The crowd was thick, alive with the rustle of paper bags and the smell of apples and fried dough. Mary had just passed the honey stand, carrying a small jar of blackberry jam. The usual shift happened around her, bodies angling away, glances darting, nostrils twitching. Then, without warning, a girl of about 8 broke free from the hand of a distracted mother and sprinted through the crowd. Blonde hair flying, she wrapped her arms around Mary's waist with all the force of love unrestrained. Gasps came before anyone could stop them. One woman dropped a bunch of carrots. An old man near the tomatoes froze mid-reach. It was as if a window had shattered in church. The girl said nothing at first. She just held on. Mary stood stiff as a scarecrow. Her hands, gloved in faded wool despite the fall warmth, hovered in the air. Then, slowly, she brought them down to the child's back. One palm, then the other. A gentle squeeze. The market was silent. Then came the voice of the mother, Julie. Panicked, breathless, she weaved through the stunned bystanders, reaching out, but she didn't scream. Something in the stillness made her stop short just a few feet away. The girl's name, whispered into the air, was Lily. No one knew what to say. No one understood what they had seen. Later, some would explain it away. Children don't notice smell, one woman said. They don't have filters, someone else added. She's just an odd little girl. But others would admit, quietly, guiltily, that for a moment they had felt something stir in their chest, something soft, something questioning. The hug lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then Lily pulled back, looked up at Mary, and said something only the old woman could hear, a whisper, light as dust. Mary's face didn't change, but her eyes did. Just enough. Then Julie stepped forward, took Lily's hand, and led her away without a word. The girl looked back twice. Mary didn't move. Later that day, after the market had cleared and the church bells rang for evening service, Mary returned to her cabin. She placed the jar of blackberry jam on the kitchen counter and sat down in the chair on her porch. The lavender plants were almost gone now, just brittle stems and dust. She stared at them for a long time, then reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a crumpled handkerchief. It was old, faded pink, a child's drawing sewn into the corner with clumsy stitches, something that looked like a sun with arms. Mary brought it to her face and inhaled deeply. There was no scent left. That night she did not light her lamp. She sat on the porch long after dark, listening to the sound of wind weaving through the trees. In the distance, a train cried out. Somewhere nearby, an owl called once, then again. And when she finally went inside, she paused in the doorway. For the first time in years, the air behind her carried something new, not just the musty, cloying scent the town had come to fear, but the faint, unmistakable trace of something else. Warmth. In her youth, Mary Whitmore's hands were always warm. Patients used to say it before they said thank you. Your hands are warm, dear, like a stove in winter. She never thought much of it. There were more important things to worry about. Timing, blood levels, angles of insertion, recovery charts. But now, in the solitude of her cedar-scented home, that memory returned uninvited. It clung to her as much as the silence did, especially after the incident at the market. She hadn't meant to hold the child. Not really. Her body had moved on its own, as if summoned by an echo from a life too far away to believe it was hers. Mary sat in the kitchen, in a chair that creaked under her like an old friend sighing with age. The window above the sink was cracked open a sliver, letting in the late afternoon wind. Outside, trees whispered their secrets to each other in rustling leaves. Inside, the clock ticked with deliberate calm. She reached for the top drawer beside the stove and pulled out a photo album. The leather was cracked, the spine fragile. She hadn't touched it in years, maybe longer. Her fingers brushed over the cover like she was touching a tombstone. When she opened it, the smell of old paper rushed up like a forgotten scent, faintly sour, oddly sweet, like pressed flowers left too long in a book. The first picture was of Thomas, her late husband, a young doctor in white, with smile lines beginning to form around eyes that had seemed too much too young. Mary remembered the way he used to hum while shaving. Not a song, just a note, steady and low like a grounding chord. He had died slowly, painfully, over 2 years of decline, and through all of it, she had stayed, feeding, cleaning, comforting. What people didn't know was that she never cried at his funeral. Not even once. She had already cried everything out in the final 6 weeks, when Thomas could no longer recognize her. His last word wasn't her name, it was stop. Whether he meant the pain or the silence, she never asked. She only obeyed, flipping further into the album. Her eyes paused on a different face, a girl. No more than 4 years old, gap-toothed, grinning, arms raised in delight beside a stack of wooden blocks. Her name had been Emily. Emily was not family. Emily had been a patient. Her file had been slim, unremarkable. Fever, vomiting, irritability. Initial diagnosis, a stomach virus. Bed rest and fluids were prescribed. Mary had administered everything by the book. But by the 3rd day, Emily stopped responding. A second opinion was called, and then a third. Blood work came back, meningitis. Too late. Emily died on a Thursday morning. Her mother screamed in the hallway. The sound didn't stop even when Mary closed the door. She had thought at that moment that the walls might crack. No one blamed her, not officially. Doctors made mistakes. Nurses followed orders. It was unfortunate, tragic, but in the end, it was within the bounds of reasonable error. That was the phrase they used in the review board. She had nodded, she had accepted, she had quit. What no one knew, not even Thomas, not her supervisor, not the mother who sobbed into her own hands, was that Mary had hesitated that second day. She had noticed something off in Emily's posture, the stiffness, the rigidity in her neck, the vague look in her eyes. It was not stomach flu. She had almost said so, almost, but she didn't, because she was tired, because she trusted the chart, because questioning the diagnosis might have offended the young doctor on call who had a fragile ego and an expensive watch. That silence cost Emily her life. The guilt didn't scream, it whispered. It didn't drown her, it hollowed her out slowly like termites in oak. And in that hollowing, Mary had made her decision. She would retreat. Live small, speak little, offer nothing. The town of Maple Hill became her penance. She chose the isolation, chose the creaky floors and the cold nights and the absence of phone calls. She didn't need punishment. She already lived inside one. At first, the quiet was unbearable. Then it became a kind of discipline. Her mornings became rituals: tea at 7, pruning the garden at 8, reading until 10, each day the same, measured, controlled. And when the smell began, she didn't panic. She recognized it too well. Merkel cell carcinoma, rare, aggressive, faintly necrotic in odor even in early stages. The irony was not lost on her. She had diagnosed herself before any doctor could. A growing lesion behind her ear, non-healing, tender. She knew what it meant, and she made no appointments. She took no action. In her mind, it was simply the body catching up with the soul. But then came Lily, the child with the arms of sunlight and the nose unbothered by rot. The girl who had smiled, held on, and said something no one else had dared to say. Now, as Mary closed the album, she realized her hands were trembling. The air smelled faintly of burnt toast, though no toaster had been used. Outside, the wind had died down. She stood slowly and walked to the mirror in the hallway. It was narrow and tarnished, a relic from another home. Her reflection startled her, not because of the age or the wear, but because, for the first time in years, she saw fear. Not fear of dying, that had been accepted, but fear of being seen. Lily had seen her, and in that single act of innocence, Mary had felt the faintest flicker of something she hadn't permitted herself to feel since Emily. Hope. It started subtly, like all things that matter. At first, Mary thought it was the pantry, a sack of potatoes left too long in the dark, or perhaps a leak under the sink, molding wood where the eye couldn't see. She cleaned, she washed. She opened the windows wider and scrubbed the baseboards until her hands ached. But the smell remained, not constant, just enough to be noticeable. A whiff here, a moment there. Sour, damp, vaguely metallic. She changed soaps, switched detergents, washed her hair twice as often. Still, the smell followed her like a shadow that never asked permission to stay. It wasn't until she leaned over the sink one morning, towel draped around her shoulders, that she noticed it. Just behind her left ear, a patch of skin she could barely see in the mirror, but could feel with the tips of her fingers. Rough, sensitive, not quite a sore, not quite a scab, just wrong. She touched it again later that night. It was warmer than the surrounding skin, pulsing faintly. A tiny lesion. She pressed gently. It bled. There was no panic, no rush of dread, just a slow, steady realization, like recognizing a song you hadn't heard in years but somehow still knew the words to. She didn't need a doctor. She had been one in every sense but title. Years of working night shifts, of triaging emergencies, of holding hands as machines flatlined. None of it had left her. Her training remained, buried under the dust of regret. She knew what it meant. Merkel cell carcinoma, a name so sterile it disguised its cruelty. Rare, fast, deadly, and unmistakably pungent in its progression. It was the body decaying while still alive, skin cells turning traitor. The odor came not from lack of cleanliness, but from cells dying and releasing gases no soap could mask. A chemical betrayal from within. Mary sat in the dark for hours that night, no tea, no book, just the smell of herself, of the truth she had tried so long to ignore. The next morning, she opened the bottom drawer of the dresser she had not touched in years. Inside was a small wooden box. She placed it on her lap, opened it slowly like uncovering something sacred or cursed. Inside was a note from Thomas, one of the last he had written, his handwriting shaky but still his. "Forgive yourself," it said. "It's time." She had ignored it then. She had buried it with the rest of the memories, the rest of her life. But now the words stared up at her, quiet and insistent. "Forgive yourself." The smell worsened with time. It moved beyond the lesion. It began to seep into the fabrics she wore, linger in her pillow, curl into the corners of her home. People began to comment more openly. Children pinched their noses. Adults avoided her entirely. The cashier at Jenkins Market no longer made eye contact. And yet, Mary did not seek help. She did not dial any numbers or drive to the clinic 20 miles south. She did not say, "Something's wrong with me." She said nothing because what was there to say? That her body had chosen the same path as her soul? That this was perhaps a kind of justice? She imagined Emily's face, not the smiling one in the album, the one from the hospital bed. Eyes unfocused, breaths shallow, skin already cooling. Mary had memorized it, not by choice, by necessity. Guilt has a way of engraving images into the brain with a kind of acid. It burns, it lasts. Some days she wondered if the smell was a message, a scent only she could decipher. You are rotting because you let someone else rot first. It was harsh, cruel, but fair. Still, something had shifted since Lily. That embrace, that small voice, Xiao no ba. 3 words, simple, illogical. Yet they echoed louder than any diagnosis. Mary caught herself breathing deeper now, searching for something. For what, she couldn't say. Redemption? Relief? A reason? She began to write again, not letters, not apologies, just notes, phrases, thoughts, sentences that came in the night and wouldn't leave. Sometimes the body speaks louder than the mouth. Decay isn't always death. Sometimes it's a clearing. If a child can forgive a smell, maybe the world can forgive more. She pinned them to the inside of her kitchen cabinet, hidden between jars of lentils and cans of tuna, her own private gospel. And yet every evening as she prepared for bed, she would catch herself pausing in the hallway mirror, tilting her head, examining the red patch growing behind her ear, smelling her own shoulder, her own skin. There was a ritual in it now, a quiet acknowledgement, a prayer perhaps. She no longer tried to cover the smell. She stopped using perfume, switched back to plain soap. Let the house smell like what it was, wood, dust, and her. The body was honest. It didn't lie. And Mary, after years of silence, began to see that perhaps she didn't need to lie either. The truth was coming. In her bones, she felt it. And for the first time, she didn't feel entirely afraid. People in small towns watch each other, not always with malice, and not always with curiosity, but with a kind of quiet diligence, as if each life was a mirror reflecting back on their own. In Maple Hill, privacy was respected in theory, but not in practice. Front porches were stages, grocery aisles confessionals. Gossip moved faster than mail. When Mary Whitmore began to smell different, noticeably, persistently, people noticed. At first, it was discomfort. Then it became suspicion. And like all suspicions in a tight-knit community, it grew without evidence, fed only by distance and silence. Carl was the first to say something, though not aloud. He simply moved his lunch table. For years, every Wednesday, he'd eaten his sandwich on the bench across from the community garden, Mary's garden. He said the sun was too harsh there now, that the birds made too much noise, but people understood. He couldn't take the smell. Carl was not a cruel man. He fixed tires for free when mothers couldn't afford it. He gave unwanted puppies to good homes. But when Mary passed him near the post office that Monday morning and greeted him with a quiet "Hello, Carl," he only nodded, eyes lowered. The scent, sour and faintly sweet, clung to the breeze like old grief. It unnerved him. Alice, 2 houses down from Mary, closed her windows for the first time in years. She said it was the pollen, that her sinuses couldn't take the autumn, but she too had seen Mary walk by, shoulders drawn in, sweater sleeves too long, and she too had whispered, "Something's wrong," to no one in particular. Julie, Lily's mother, noticed the change not just in Mary but in her daughter. Lily had begun drawing strange things: old women with wild hair, flowers growing from rooftops, cats with sad eyes. She hummed unfamiliar tunes, asked about lavender and illnesses, about why some people smelled like forgotten places. Julie worried, not because she believed Mary was dangerous, but because she didn't know how to explain her. A woman who lived alone, smelled odd, and drew children to her like a magnet with no electricity. It made no sense. And in small towns, what made no sense was often what people feared most. The distance widened. Neighbors crossed the street when Mary approached. People who once waved now stared at their phones. Even Jenkins Market began offering delivery, quietly and only to one address. And yet Mary never faltered. She walked the same route each week. She wore the same faded clothes, watered her garden, read on her porch. She said nothing, and the town in turn said everything, just not to her. Behind doors and under breath, theories bloomed. "Could be mold in her house," said a teacher. "I heard she used to be in a hospital. Maybe she caught something," replied the baker's wife. "I think she's sick and doesn't want to admit it. She's always been odd." The words weren't shouted. They were planted. Quietly, deeply, and like weeds, they found purchase. No one remembered the woman who once delivered soup during snowstorms, or the one who nursed Mrs. Blanton through shingles without ever complaining. The Mary who had held Carl's hand when his sister died, who sat next to Alice during her first chemotherapy session, she faded, replaced by the version with the smell, with the mystery, with the question mark. But perhaps the most painful shift wasn't in the way others saw Mary. It was in the way Mary saw herself reflected in them. When she walked into town, she kept her eyes on the ground, not out of shame, but out of protection. Looking into someone's face and finding fear was worse than any insult. At least insults meant acknowledgement. She started timing her errands, early mornings, late evenings, avoiding the peak hours, the chatter, the eyes. She heard a group of teenagers once outside the general store. They didn't see her nearby. "Have you smelled her house? It's like something's dead." "I bet it is." They laughed, and for a moment Mary felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just an odd, hollow acceptance. She returned home, stood at the mirror, and tried to see what they saw. Her skin had thinned, grown translucent in places. The lesion behind her ear had grown darker, like a bruised plum, slightly raised, no longer bleeding but crusted in defeat. Her eyes, once clear, seemed fogged, not by age but by isolation. Still she washed. She tried. Each morning she scrubbed gently, applied salves, brushed her hair, pinned it back. She wore lavender oil behind her wrists. It made no difference. The body speaks when it wants to. And sometimes it screams. One evening she found a note taped to her front gate. No signature, no handwriting she recognized. It read, "Please see a doctor. We're concerned." There was kindness in the message, but also judgment. Concern laced with rejection. She left it there. Let the rain soak it. Let the ink bleed into the wood. Then the next morning, a flower appeared on her porch, one stem, wild daisy, wrapped in tissue, no note. She brought it inside, placed it in a jar, and stared at it through breakfast. Someone still saw her, or remembered, or chose not to be afraid. And that for now was enough. The first time Lily wandered into Mary's yard, it was by accident. A ball, tossed too hard or caught by a gust of autumn wind, had bounced its way through the loose slats of the garden fence. Most children would have stopped short, hesitated, peered between the gaps, and thought better of it. But Lily was not most children. She ducked through the open gate like she belonged there, leaves catching in the cuffs of her sleeves. Her shoes were too big, hand-me-downs from a cousin, and her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that sagged slightly to one side. She wasn't humming, but she often did. Mary saw her from the porch. A flash of yellow, a giggle, a sudden rustling in the lavender. The old woman didn't move. She sat with her hands folded, a book open on her lap, unread. Lily didn't look up right away. She found the ball near a row of overgrown basil, crouched, and picked it up as if she were in her own backyard. Then she turned, and their eyes met. There was no hesitation. Lily walked right up to the porch steps and smiled. "You have cats," she said matter-of-factly. "I saw one in the window." Mary blinked. "I do," she answered, her voice rusty from disuse. "I like cats," Lily continued, then looked around. "It smells weird here. Not bad, just weird, like trees when it rains." Mary's mouth twitched just slightly. It wasn't a smile, but it wasn't nothing. "You shouldn't be here," she said gently. "I came for my ball," Lily replied, holding it up. "But it's okay, right? You're not a witch." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, full of the kind of certainty that only children possess. Mary studied her face, open, unafraid, clear-eyed in a way most adults had forgotten how to be. "You should go home," she said after a pause, "before your mother worries." Lily nodded, turned, and walked back through the gate with the same confidence she'd arrived with. No fear, no curiosity, no judgment. The next day she came back. This time there was no ball, just her, a notebook, and a red crayon. She sat on the grass by the edge of the garden, cross-legged, and began to draw. Mary watched from the window. She didn't come out, but she didn't stop her either. Lily returned the day after that, and the day after that. Always quiet, always content to simply sit, draw, hum, or whisper stories to herself. She never asked questions, never made demands. She brought cookies once, 3, wrapped in a napkin, and left them on the porch step like an offering. Mary didn't eat them, but she didn't throw them away either. Weeks passed like this. The town noticed, of course. Julie tried to keep Lily away, but the girl was clever. She'd sneak out, invent errands, take long routes home from school. She never lied, exactly, just omitted. Julie confronted Mary once, awkward and stern, standing at the edge of the garden like someone waiting for a verdict. "She keeps talking about you," Julie said. "Says you tell better stories than her teachers." Mary didn't reply. "I don't want to be rude," Julie continued, "but people talk. They're saying things. About you. About her spending time here." Still, Mary said nothing. Her gaze was calm, almost soft. "She's drawn to you," Julie added, quieter now. "I don't know why." Mary's voice, when it came, was nearly a whisper. "Children see what adults forget." Julie didn't respond. She just nodded, eyes uncertain, and left. After that, she stopped trying to stop Lily. The child became part of Mary's days. She asked to learn how to plant seeds. She asked about herbs, about the names of clouds. She never asked about the smell. Sometimes she would sit beside Mary on the porch, small shoulder pressing against thin bone, and speak in a voice too low for the wind to steal. One afternoon, as the sun draped itself lazily across the yard, Lily brought a drawing. It showed a house made of flowers, vines for walls, petals for shingles. Inside was a woman with silver hair and a cat on her lap. "That's you," Lily said. Mary took the paper with hands that trembled, not from weakness, from something harder to name. "I think flowers can grow from anything," Lily added. "Even sad people." Mary closed her eyes. Just for a moment, she didn't deserve this. Not the affection, not the ease, not the trust. But Lily didn't care. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something inside Mary began to shift. Not heal. Healing was too grand, too final. But shift, like frost beginning to thaw, like wood beginning to breathe again after a long winter. The smell never left. It clung to her skin, her clothes, her shadow. But Lily never flinched. She sat beside it, accepted it, and in doing so, made it bearable. Mary began to write again, this time not notes for herself, but small stories. For Lily. Tales of talking foxes and lonely barns, of seeds that bloomed in darkness, of a girl who could see things others couldn't. She never signed them, never read them aloud, but Lily always knew who they were from. The notice was printed on pale yellow paper and pinned to the bulletin board outside Jenkins Market. It was also posted in the church vestibule, at the community center, and on the post office door. The wording was polite, but the intent was unmistakable. Community meeting, public health and safety concerns, Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. At the town hall, all residents encouraged to attend. Mary read it on her way home from the market, her fingers brushing lightly over the edge of the page. No names, no specifics, but she knew. She had felt it building. The whispers had grown louder, the eyes more open in their discomfort. Conversations quieted when she entered rooms, only to resume once her back was turned. Even the children had begun to echo their parents, nose crinkled, stepping back, avoiding her entirely, except for Lily. But one child's kindness could not hold back the tide of an entire town. That Wednesday evening, the sky was the color of ash. The sun had dipped behind the hills, leaving a bruised horizon. Mary sat in her front room, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the clock. She knew they would meet without her, that her presence would only make things worse. But still, she waited, as if listening closely enough might allow her to hear the words spoken in that distant room. The town hall filled quickly. Folding chairs scraped the floor as neighbors took their places. Carl sat near the back, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Alice was wheeled in by her niece, a wool blanket across her lap despite the warm air. Julie arrived late, Lily in tow, though the child was quickly ushered outside with a pack of colored pencils and a sketch pad. At the front of the room stood Pastor Whitcomb, who had agreed to moderate. He cleared his throat and opened the meeting with the same sentence he always used for uncomfortable topics. "We gathered tonight out of concern, not judgment." Silence met him, then a cough, then the shuffle of papers. One by one, residents stood to speak. No one mentioned Mary by name, but everyone knew who they meant. "She's clearly unwell," said a woman in a green cardigan, "and we don't know what she has. I'm not saying she's dangerous," someone else added, "but the smell, it's not normal." Carl finally stood. His voice was low, firm. "I don't want to see anyone hurt, especially the kids. If something's wrong and she won't say it, we have a right to protect ourselves." There were nods, murmurs of agreement. Alice spoke next, her voice frail but clear. "I remember when she brought me tea after my first chemo. She sat with me for hours, didn't say a word, just held my hand." "That was a long time ago," someone muttered. Julie stood last. She looked torn, her eyes flicking toward the window where Lily sat drawing on the steps. "I don't know what's happening to her," she said, "but I know she's not cruel. She's not dangerous. My daughter loves her." "And that's what worries us," a man replied. "It's not just about her, it's about what she could be exposing others to." The room fell quiet. Then the pastor said, should we consider drafting a formal request, asking her to seek medical help, or to relocate? The suggestion hung in the air like smoke. Outside, Lily looked up from her sketchbook. She had grown used to hearing her name spoken through closed doors. But this time, it wasn't her name. It was something worse. It was Mary. She stood, slipped through the door, and walked straight into the meeting room. No one noticed at first. The voices continued. But then she climbed onto the low stage where the pastor stood, and silence fell. Lily's hands were small but steady. Her voice, when it came, was louder than anyone expected. You're all wrong. The words struck like a bell. She's not scary. She's not sick like you think. She smells like earth, like the woods after rain. And you don't even ask why. Julie rose from her seat, panic flashing across her face, but she didn't speak. Lily turned, addressing the room like someone twice her age. Do you know what she does? She makes stories. For me. She grows lavender and talks to cats. She remembers everything I say, and she never once told me to leave. Her chin lifted. You all act like she's a ghost, but maybe you're just afraid of things you don't understand. No one moved. Even Carl lowered his eyes. Mary never knew what was said in those final minutes. She never heard the silence that stretched on after Lily's words. Never saw the way Alice nodded, the way Julie took her daughter's hand, not with anger, but with awe. But she did notice the change that followed. People still kept their distance, but there was less venom in their glances. A few even nodded when they passed. And one morning, a jar of honey appeared on her porch with a note that said simply, "Thank you for the stories." Mary read the note twice, then tucked it into the wooden box where she kept all things too fragile to throw away. She still smelled like herself. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a curse. The wind had changed. It no longer carried the crisp scent of falling leaves or the distant promise of chimney smoke. It was colder now, sharper, like a knife drawn too close to skin. Mary noticed it most in the mornings when her bones ached more than usual and the kettle took longer to whistle. The days after the meeting blurred together. People had quieted, yes. The eyes had softened, but nothing erased the weight inside her. It clung to her ribs like damp cloth, pressing in, pulling down. Even Lily's smile, bright, unwavering, could not keep the shadows at bay. Mary had hoped that silence would be enough, that choosing solitude, penance, smallness would somehow balance the scales. But guilt is not a ledger. It is a living thing, and hers had begun to feed again. She stopped writing. The stories that once came in the night now slipped away like mist, leaving her hands empty and her mind echoing. She slept less, ate less, drifted through her house like a ghost rehearsing her own vanishing. The lesion behind her ear had spread. It curved down her neck now, angry and purple, tender to the touch. She wore scarves to bed, not for warmth, but to keep the smell from reaching her nose. It had worsened, grown denser, more insistent, a scent like rust and rot and resignation. On the third night of November, Mary lit every candle in her home. She moved slowly, deliberately, not out of ritual, but out of a sense of finality. There was no note, no speech, just the quiet acknowledgement that she had reached a place beyond return. She retrieved the small vial from the back of the cupboard. Morphine, long expired but potent enough. It had once been for Thomas. She had never used it, couldn't bear to, until now. The vial sat on the table beside her tea. She stared at it for a long time, watching the way the candlelight bent around the glass. She thought of Emily, of her small fingers and open eyes, of the breath that didn't come. Mary closed her eyes and exhaled. And then a sound, a knock. Not loud, not demanding, just there. She opened her eyes, unsure if she had imagined it. But it came again. She rose, feet unsure beneath her, and moved to the door. Lily stood there, cheeks red from the cold, hair messy, shoes untied. "I forgot to give you something," she said, holding out a folded piece of paper. Mary took it without speaking. Her hands trembled. "It's a picture," Lily explained, "of you and your garden. I made it at school but saved it for today because the sky looked like the one in the picture." Mary opened the paper slowly. Crayon lines, a cabin with windows glowing gold, flowers blooming from the roof, a woman on the porch smiling, cats in the grass, and above it all, a sky painted purple and blue with streaks of orange. "It's not perfect," Lily said, "but it's how I see you." Mary couldn't speak. Lily looked up. Her expression changed just slightly, a tilt of the head, a furrow of the brow. Are you okay? Mary swallowed. She tried to lie, to nod, to smile, but instead something cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, just enough. No, she whispered. Lily didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She stepped forward, arms small but certain, and wrapped them around Mary's waist. Mary fell to her knees. She sobbed without sound, shoulders shaking, face buried in the crook of the child's neck. The smell, the thing that had defined her, isolated her, cursed her, meant nothing now. It hovered between them, but Lily didn't pull away. I'm here, the girl said softly. I'm not going anywhere. Later, after Lily had gone and the candles had burned low, Mary poured the morphine down the sink. The vial clinked as it hit the porcelain basin. She watched the liquid swirl, disappear, and felt something shift inside her. Not hope, not yet, but something like the start of it. The next morning the house felt different. It wasn't warmer or brighter or any less quiet. But something had changed. The air no longer pressed in on Mary with quite the same weight. The corners of the room didn't seem as far away. Her breath came easier. She boiled water for tea, then poured it, and let it cool untouched beside her. The drawing still sat on the table where she'd left it. She looked at it again, really looked. The colors were bold, joyful. The house glowed from within. The woman in the picture smiled. A version of herself Mary hadn't seen in decades, perhaps never. Something in her stirred, heavy and old, like a book unopened for too long. She stood slowly, went to the hallway closet and opened a drawer she had not touched in years. Inside, beneath old scarves and boxes of unopened lotion, lay a bundle of envelopes. Most were blank. One bore a name written in tidy, deliberate print. Dr. Harold Keating. She had worked under him for almost 6 years. He had been her supervisor, her mentor, her reluctant friend. After Thomas died, he was the only one who didn't offer platitudes. Just silence, and the presence of someone who understood how words could make grief heavier, not lighter. She hadn't spoken to him since Portland, since the hospital, since Emily. She took out a sheet of paper, smoothed it flat, and picked up a pen. The first word came slowly, Harold, then a pause. She exhaled, then wrote, I don't know if you remember what happened on October 19th, 1984. I do. I've remembered it every day since. Her handwriting was neat, even, not rushed. Her name was Emily, 4 years old. You remember that too. She came in with symptoms that didn't make sense. I knew. God help me, I knew. There was something wrong with the way she moved, with her neck, with her eyes. Mary stopped and pressed her hand to her chest, then continued. But I didn't say anything. I didn't speak. I told myself the chart was right, that the others had seen more, that I was just tired, just cautious, just respectful. But I was none of those things. I was afraid, afraid to contradict, afraid to be wrong, afraid to be loud in a room that had never asked me to be anything but quiet. The next lines came faster, and because of that, she died, because of me. She stared at those words for a long time, then went on. I resigned a week later. You called once, I didn't answer. You sent a letter. I burned it. I told myself I was moving on. But I wasn't. I was burying myself. Now I am rotting, Harold. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. Merkel cell carcinoma, advanced, untreated. I recognized it early. I chose not to act. I thought it was fitting. Just. Her handwriting shook now, not from regret, but from release. And yet something unexpected has happened. There is a little girl here. Her name is Lily. She is not afraid of me. She does not recoil. She does not see the smell, or the sickness, or the history. She sees me. Mary paused, let the ink dry. She is the younger sister of Emily. The words looked unreal on the page, too cruel, too precise, but they were true. I knew the moment I heard her full name. There are not many families with a tragedy like that who move to a town like this. I didn't confirm it. I didn't need to. Some truths walk into the room before they are spoken. And I didn't tell her. I couldn't. I still can't, but she saved me anyway. Without knowing what I took from her family, she gave something back. Mary sat still, letting the wind rattle the windows. Then she finished, I am not writing for forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I am writing because I wanted someone to know. Not gossip, not rumor, not sanitized versions, the truth. Thank you for the years when I was still someone worth mentoring. Thank you for being the last person who expected me to speak when it mattered. I didn't. But now I have. Mary, she folded the letter carefully, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it with slow, steady hands. Then she placed it on the mantel, beneath the old photo of Thomas, and sat back in her chair. She did not cry. There was nothing left to cry out, only space, only silence. And for the first time in decades, she felt both as something other than punishment. The letter was never mailed. Mary left it on the mantel for 3 days, watching the envelope fade slightly in the pale light that crept through the curtains. She told herself she would walk it to the post office, that she would stand in line, place it on the counter, and hand it over. But each day passed, and the letter stayed. On the 4th morning, her legs failed her. It happened quietly. She rose too quickly, the room tilted, and then she was on the floor. Not in pain, just stunned. Her breath caught. She waited for the dizziness to pass, but it didn't. Her hands trembled, cold and weak against the hardwood. She stayed there for nearly an hour. It was Lily who found her. The child arrived as she always did, slipping through the side gate like a secret. But this time, she didn't draw or hum. She pushed the door open and called out. When there was no answer, she stepped inside. Later, Mary would only remember the sound of small feet crossing the kitchen tile, the gasp, the urgency. Julie came running, eyes wide with panic. She didn't speak to Mary. Not right away. She gathered her daughter, made a call, and within an hour, someone else was there. Dr. Lambert was not from Maple Hill. He came from the larger town 20 miles south, the one with traffic lights and waiting rooms and forms to fill out. He carried a soft brown bag and a face that had seen this kind of thing before. He examined Mary with gentle hands and quiet nods. No judgment, no questions she couldn't answer. He asked for permission before touching her shoulder, before unwrapping the scarf. When he saw the lesion, he paused. He didn't hide it well. Merkel cell carcinoma, he said. His voice was steady, professional, a rare and aggressive form of skin cancer. Most common in the elderly, often missed until too late. He asked if she'd seen anyone. She shook her head. He asked if she understood the implications. She nodded. Julie stood in the corner of the room, arms folded tightly across her chest. She had seen the scarf, the smell, the stories Lily brought home, but she had not expected this. Not the clarity of the diagnosis, not the nearness of the end. After the doctor left, Julie remained. The house was quiet again. Mary sat in her chair, a blanket across her lap, the envelope still untouched on the mantel. Julie spoke first. You knew. Mary said nothing. For how long? Mary looked toward the window. The garden beyond it was fading. The lavender had dried out, the stems bent toward the ground like they were mourning something too. Years, she said softly. Julie didn't reply right away. She loves you, you know, Lily. Mary nodded. I should be angry, Julie said, and there was no heat in it. Only exhaustion. You let her get close. You let us think this was nothing. Mary turned to face her. Would you have let her stay if you had known? Julie didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. No one else came, Mary whispered. No one else saw me. Julie's voice cracked. We didn't know what to see. There were no apologies, none were expected. Some wounds bled too long for bandages. When Julie left, she took nothing but her daughter's sketchbook and left behind silence that no longer felt cruel. That evening, Mary sat beside the window with the letter in her lap. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She had written what mattered. The words had already done their work, and then came the knock. Not urgent, not hesitant. Julie stood on the porch holding a basket. Inside were candles, a soft wool scarf, and a folded piece of paper. We're planning something, she said, for you. Mary blinked. A gathering, not a funeral, something better, while you're still here. Mary opened her mouth to protest. But Julie raised a hand. You don't get to say no. Then she smiled. Just barely, just enough. The invitations were handwritten, not printed, not sent electronically. Maple Hill didn't have a town-wide mailing list, and even if it had, Julie wouldn't have used it. She wrote each note with her own hand, each one carefully folded and tucked into doors, slipped into coat pockets, or passed quietly during Sunday service. They didn't call it a memorial, or a party, or anything that might imply endings. They called it a farewell gathering. Not goodbye, just farewell. Mary did not want it. She said so more than once, her voice firm, eyes clear. But Julie only smiled and nodded, and then changed the subject. Lily made a crown of dried lavender and said it was for the queen of quiet things. There was no winning after that. The gathering was planned for a Sunday afternoon, early enough that the light would still be soft, late enough that no one could use work as an excuse. Julie baked. Carl brought folding chairs. Alice asked her niece to play piano, just one song. The town responded with a kind of quiet reverence, like they knew finally what was owed. Mary woke early that day, long before the sun had cleared the trees. She moved slowly, but not hesitantly. She chose a dress she hadn't worn in decades, a soft blue cotton, with tiny buttons down the front and a collar that still held the shape of memory. She brushed her hair carefully, wound it into the low bun she used to wear at the hospital. Her hands trembled only once. Lily arrived just before noon, her boots muddy, cheeks red, and eyes shining. She held out the lavender crown with both hands. "You have to wear it," she said. "It's part of the ceremony." Mary laughed. Not a sound she had used in years, not a dry exhale or a polite huff, but a real living laugh that reached her eyes and startled the dust in the corners of the room. They walked to the community center together, slowly. No one rushed them. People were already gathered on the lawn, folding chairs in uneven rows, tables with mismatched tablecloths, a jug of lemonade, a plate of sandwiches, nothing extravagant, everything sincere. When Mary stepped into view, the crowd quieted. It wasn't out of discomfort, not anymore. It was reverence. She moved among them like a figure from a story, half real, half remembered. People nodded, smiled. Some offered hugs. She accepted what she could. No one mentioned the smell. It lingered, yes, but it had become something else now. Not an accusation, not a mystery, just part of the air around her, part of her. Carl stood to speak first. He cleared his throat, held his cap in both hands, and spoke slowly. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Years ago, when my sister passed, you were the only one who sat with me. I forgot that. I forgot you. I'm sorry." He sat back down, wiping his eyes. Alice spoke next. Her voice was thinner, but just as sure. "She saved my life. Not with medicine, but with time. I was afraid. She was not. She sat beside me until the fear left." Julie kept her speech short. "My daughter found something here that I couldn't see. I'm grateful to both of them for reminding me how to look." Then came Lily. She climbed onto the small wooden stage, the crown still on Mary's head, and unfolded a piece of paper. The wind threatened to take it, but she held it tight. "I wrote a poem," she said. "It's not long." She cleared her throat and began. "Some people are loud like thunder. Some people are quiet like earth. One grows flowers, the other shakes skies. But both matter. You smell like stories left in the rain, like leaves that know when to fall, like cats who remember your name, like hands that still hold even when they shake. You are the lavender in my winter, the hush before sleep, the soft breath that says you are not alone." There was no applause, just silence, the kind that follows something sacred. Mary wept, quietly, without shame. She stood, embraced Lily, and for the first time, turned to face the town not as a ghost, but as herself. When it ended, people lingered. They drank lemonade, talked about nothing important, and stayed longer than they meant to. That night, Mary returned home and placed the poem beside the letter on the mantel. And for the first time in many years, she slept without waking once. The morning Mary Whitmore died was quiet in a way that felt intentional. The sky held a pale blue stillness, like it was waiting. No birds called. No breeze disturbed the frost that had settled overnight on the edges of the lavender beds. Even the trees, which usually rustled like old paper, stood still. Inside her home, the air was warm. A fire had been lit sometime in the early hours, its embers soft and red. The kettle sat on the stove, full but unboiled. A single cup waited on the counter, next to a folded dish towel. Mary had risen early, just after 4, her body knew. Not with pain or panic, but with something quieter, an understanding. She moved through the house slowly, touching things. The corner of the bookshelf where Thomas used to tap his fingers, the edge of the chair where Lily liked to sit and swing her feet, the windowsill where cats stretched in the sun. Her fingers lingered on each one like a benediction. She did not rush. There were no final declarations, no dramatic gestures, just the small, sacred act of noticing. At the mantel, she paused. The letter to Dr. Keating remained, still unsent. Beside it, the poem from Lily. Between them, Mary placed a new envelope. This one was addressed in the same steady handwriting, but with a different name. Lily inside was a single page. Nothing lengthy, just enough. "My dear Lily, You are the first person in many, many years to see me without flinching. You made me remember that I once laughed, once listened, once mattered. Thank you for giving me back my name. There's so much I could say, but you already know the most important part. You were never a visitor. You were home. Mary, she left it beneath the ceramic cat that always sat crooked on the side table, the one Lily liked to turn sideways, saying it looked like it was thinking. Then Mary returned to her chair. She pulled the blanket over her legs, adjusted the pillow behind her head, and let her body sink into stillness. Her breathing slowed. Her hands, folded neatly in her lap, remained steady. The sun rose higher, spilling gold over the floor. By the time Julie and Lily arrived later that morning, bringing cinnamon bread and stories from the town square, the house was silent. They knocked, waited, then let themselves in. The warmth of the fire still lingered. Nothing was out of place. The tea was uncooked. The chair was full. Lily crossed the room first, slow steps growing faster. She stopped at Mary's feet, looked up, and understood. Julie's breath caught in her throat. Neither of them cried right away. They sat beside her, held her hand, smoothed her hair. Only when Lily reached the mantel and found the letter did the tears come. She read it aloud, her voice steady at first, then trembling. When she finished, she placed the note on her lap and looked around the room. It didn't feel empty. People from town began arriving before noon, not because they were summoned, but because they knew. The absence reached them before the news did. Carl brought flowers. Alice came wrapped in her shawl, eyes wet and wide. Someone lit candles. Someone else started a pot of tea. No one spoke loudly. No one tried to fill the silence. They simply gathered, and in that gathering something happened. The smell that had once separated Mary from the world no longer lingered as a fence. It was memory now. Earth, lavender, smoke. Something left behind in love, not in fear. The woman who had once been feared for her silence was now remembered for her stillness, her gentleness, her patience. Lily placed the drawing she had made, the house made of flowers, on Mary's lap. Then she sat beside her, holding one hand until the sky outside dimmed. That night, the town slept with windows open, and for the first time in years, Mary Whitmore was not alone. 10 years later, the house on Cedar Street still stood. The paint had faded, the shutters leaned a little more, but the lavender had returned, stronger and wilder than before. It spilled over the garden beds and climbed the fence, scenting the air with the same soft persistence that had once set a town on edge. People walked by more often now. Some stopped, some lingered. Children leaned over the fence and whispered stories about the old woman who used to live there. Not scary stories, gentle ones, about tea and cats and quiet magic. Lily came back every summer. By then, she was no longer the child with tangled hair and oversized boots. She had grown tall, with a quiet strength in her shoulders and a calmness in her eyes that mirrored someone long gone. She wore her hair loose now, but still kept a pencil behind one ear. Old habits. She was 22, and her name was etched in soft gold letters on the glass of a new building just outside town. Whitmore Care Center, a place for those who remember, and those who feel forgotten. It wasn't large, just 8 rooms and a common space filled with windows and the smell of clean linen and honey. Each room had a name, not a number. Names like rosemary, juniper, sage, plants that lasted, plants that healed. People came from nearby towns. Some stayed a week, some never left. All of them carried stories. Some they shared, some they didn't. It didn't matter. Here they were seen. Lily walked the halls each morning with a clipboard in one hand and a teacup in the other. She listened, she sat, she stayed longer than she needed to. On the western wall of the common room hung a painting, done in oil and careful brushstrokes. It showed a small wooden house with lavender spilling down the steps. A woman sat on the porch, gray hair pinned neatly, a cat curled beside her feet. Most people didn't know who she was. Lily never told them. But every year, on the anniversary of her passing, she placed a single stem of fresh lavender beneath the painting. No note, no speech, just presence. Julie still lived in Maple Hill. She ran the bakery now. Her hands ached more than they used to, and her voice had grown softer. But her pride in her daughter remained sharp and clear. She sees things, she told customers. Always has, not with her eyes, with something deeper. Carl came by sometimes. He fixed the leaky pipes in the center. Never accepted money. Alice had passed quietly 2 winters prior, but her niece now volunteered once a week, reading poetry to residents who didn't always understand the words, but liked the sound. Life moved on, as it always does, but something in Maple Hill had shifted since Mary Whitmore. The town remembered her now not as the woman with the smell, but as the woman who stayed, who endured, who gave a child the courage to reach beyond fear. Lily sat in the garden behind the care center one afternoon, notebook open, pen idle. The sun warmed the back of her neck. Bees hummed nearby. Someone was singing faintly inside. She thought about the last letter Mary had written. She still kept it, pressed between pages of her favorite book. The paper had yellowed, but the words were alive. You were never a visitor, you were home. She hadn't understood the full weight of those words until she opened Whitmore Care, until she saw how many people were waiting to be seen, to be touched without shrinking, to be named gently. She closed her notebook. In the center of the garden stood a tree, newly planted that spring. Beneath it, a small plaque. For Mary Whitmore, she grew lavender where others saw rot. The roots had taken well. The leaves shimmered in the breeze. Lily reached out and touched the bark. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We spend our lives avoiding what makes us uncomfortable, smells, silence, sorrow, but sometimes the things we turn away from are the very things that carry the deepest truths. Mary Whitmore was never trying to be seen. She just wanted to leave the world a little softer than she found it. And in the end, that's what we all hope for, isn't it? If this story touched something in you, share it. Talk about it. Hold someone tighter tonight. And if you believe stories like Mary still matter, subscribe now so you never miss the next one. Because the quietest voices often echo the longest.